Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is the place where members of the law enforcement community share their wisdom and experience through me, the chaplain, so that they can encourage others who wear the badge. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as local detectives and patrolmen in my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain deliver advice and insights so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. Today we're talking to Wendy Medina. Wendy is the Program Supervisor of the Victim Services Unit in the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. On the organization chart, the Chaplains Association falls under the Victim Services Unit, so technically Wendy is my boss. But I know her as a compassionate professional who reaches out to the victims of crime, explains to them their rights and resources, and creates a bridge of trust between the victim's family and law enforcement. This is the part of law enforcement that you may not know much about. So Wendy is going to explain what Victim Services does and what kind of resources and services are afforded to victims of crime. Make sure that you listen as she describes not only the job itself, but the type of personal qualities her team has that make them so effective in this kind of work. She also talks about what an advocate can do to stay emotionally healthy. Here is Wendy Medina. Hello, Wendy. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Chaplain. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you're here today. I want to ask about Victim Services. You're the Program Supervisor for the Victim Services Unit. What is Victim Services?
Sure. Well, Victim Services is a helping field for victims of crime. Many law enforcement agencies have a victim services unit or something very similar within their departments, where it's a unit that's just dedicated to serving victims and the folks that come in through the police department that are in a vulnerable situation and may need help making a police report or navigating that criminal justice process. And in our police department, our victim services unit is actually the first in the entire state of Kansas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we were started in 1999, and since then, other departments in the state have followed our lead and created their own units dedicated to serving victims of crime. And it's kind of cool that as the very first ones, we've had some influence and been able to provide support and ideas and guidance to a few of the other agencies that have decided to develop something similar.
Now, are these units staffed by sworn officers in uniform, or is this all civilian employees, or is it mixed in some places?
I think it depends on the agency. In our department, all of our advocates and staff are civilian positions.
Okay. So you're employed by the police department, but you're civilian employees.
Correct.
And then who receives the help? Who's eligible to be helped by you guys?
Anybody that resides in Wyandotte County.
Okay.
Is eligible for any type of services from our unit. There's various ways for folks to get connected to services through our unit. I would say the primary form of folks to know about our unit is through our officers. So when the officers make contact with any victim on a scene when they're responding to any type of call, one of the main resources that they have in their toolkit is to refer folks to the Victim Services Unit. So if they see someone that may have a need and could use some supportive services, which we can talk about the different things that we have, right. That's usually the first point of contact to get folks to us. And then we also participate in different outreach and community events in the area to let folks know that we are here, because we know a lot of folks might not even feel comfortable reporting to law enforcement. They might not know that their situation even qualifies for some assistance and services. So we try to also make ourselves known in the public and bring awareness, and maybe via that route is how some people can get connected to us.
When I first was aware of the work that you did, I saw you interacting with the family members of homicide victims and, really showing a lot of compassion and being there on scene and giving them material, guiding them toward counseling and grief, support, that kind of thing. And helping them understand, okay, this is your case number and here's who you call and that sort of stuff. But what qualifies somebody to be a victim who can receive your help? Is it always victims of violent crime?
Not necessarily violent crime. We also serve victims of property crime.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the majority will be our domestic violence victims, sex crimes victims, crimes against children and their parents, and like you mentioned, the homicide victims. So at the heart of our victim services unit is our response advocates, and they are the ones that have that role of 24/7 responding, Monday through Friday, holidays included.
Oh, yeah. Middle of the night.
Anytime.
Yes. Yep.
Really, if a homicide occurs in our city, within an hour, you'll have a compassionate, responsible, competent victim advocate that will be there. And it's very special, the role that they have, because it includes just basically being there for the family and providing that initial information, including a death notification. And there's a ton of people on scene when a homicide occurs, and we know everyone has a different job, a different duty, a different role. So it's very special to have a victim advocate that their only responsibility is to be there for that family.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, because it's so busy, there's CSI and there's detectives and there's uniformed officers and there's all these different people walking around. And then you guys appear and you're wearing civilian clothes and you are focused on these victims and the family of these victims. You are concerned about what their next steps are and who's going to take care of them down the road and who's going to help get them answers and who's going to help get them support. And I just think it's a really special thing. It overlaps some with what I do as a chaplain, and I'm just super impressed by that kind of work. And so what kind of services do you provide?
So when it comes to responding to those homicide scenes, we are participating in the major case page. So that's the page that goes out when a homicide happens, and it alerts the detectives that are on call, the CSI, anyone that needs to respond to that scene to investigate a homicide, and that includes us. So right away, we are alerted. We have our city vehicles that are packed to the brim with emergency supplies, things like blankets, clothing, because, if a homicide occurs and people have to step out of their house, they might not be thinking about putting shoes on, or they're not thinking that it's snowing outside or that it's raining.
Yeah, you and I were out on a call this last year where it just rained on us the entire afternoon.
Exactly.
And you had all kinds of, you had umbrellas, you had blankets, you had all sorts of, you just kept coming back.
I don't know how it all fits in the trunk, but we definitely have all of the supplies. And if we don't have them there, we can run out and purchase them. Meals, things like that folks don't necessarily have when they're going through a traumatic moment in their life. And it might be the worst moment in their life. Yeah. So for us to just be able to be present and provide that support, that's very meaningful. So initially we'll respond if there's a death notification that needs to occur. Our advocates are trained in providing a trauma-informed death notification to the next of kin as soon as possible. So we'll check in with whoever's leading the crime scene. It can be the homicide captain and the detectives that are lead in that moment to gather the initial information. So things like confirming the victim's identity, because obviously we need to be 100% sure of a victim's identity before we provide any notification to anybody. God forbid we ever make a mistake in that aspect. So we gather that information, and anything very basic and initial, like the case number, the contact information for the detectives, and their names. And we put a packet together that has initial information about what happens next when you lose a loved one to homicide. And it also has some steps about the funeral planning process and what victims' rights are in that aspect, because we obviously want to avoid anybody getting taken advantage of during a vulnerable situation, which we don't think so. I mean, most of our area funeral homes are extremely ethical, and we've worked with a lot of them with our families that we work with. So, but we still have that in place for them to browse whenever they have a moment. And that packet that we give families initially also has information about different grief therapy resources for themselves, for children, and crime victims compensation. So that's a very large part of the services that we provide when it comes to homicide victims' families, the crime victims compensation, because that's a fund through the Attorney General's office that can help victims pay for funeral costs, medical when it's a different type of case, grief counseling, loss of support for dependent kiddos. But we like to tell families that they don't need to look over the details in that packet in that moment. Some people want to. Everybody responds to trauma differently. So some folks, have questions right away and they want to get the pen and start filling out the forms. But other times we just say, keep this close to you, or let me give this to somebody who you want me to give it for them to hold on to. And then we'll go over it at your pace. We'll go at your rate of speed.
Is there an average length of time that you're interacting with these victims? Yeah.
So I would say initially when it comes to the homicides, that first couple of weeks, they're very hands-on. So initially on the scene, and then the next business day, we'll make sure that we touch base again. Then we'll definitely schedule an interview with the detectives. It's just, we call it the family meetings. Everything's so hectic in the scene, and the detectives don't have the time to kind of answer many questions, especially because they might not have that much information initially. So then after a couple days, the detectives may have already thought through some things and what they're able to share and what they're not, because obviously some things can't be shared with the public to keep the integrity of the case and make sure those details that will be helpful later in prosecution are not shared where they don't need to be. So we like to bring the families in along with the lead detectives to just have a conversation. And that also helps the detectives because they can gather some information from the family that may be helpful to the case. And then it also helps the victims sit down and have a little bit more of an understanding of what happened and ask those basic initial questions. And if the detectives are comfortable with answering those things, then that's really good. We're happy, and we just kind of sit and we, offer them water, tissue, because obviously it can get emotional. And after the meeting with the detectives, that's usually a good time to start touching base on the documentation that's included in the initial packet that we give away. So we often use that time also to fill out the application for crime victims compensation. If they have any receipts for any funeral home or information about the funeral home that they've chosen, we gather those things and we help them put that packet together.
Sure. As a chaplain, I've only been in those meetings just a few times, and usually after I leave the crime scene, I don't ever see those families again. And so it does warm my heart that you're following up with them again and again and for weeks and longer.
We sure do, yeah. It can be even longer. Hopefully a person gets charged with the crime and then it gets sent over to the DA's office for prosecution. At that point, there are also advocates over at the DA's office that kind of handle kind of what we do, but on their level in the criminal justice process. So that's kind of nice when you can pass it along to the other advocate and make that introduction and give those advocates the contact information to the families because we work really closely with them. And as soon as someone gets charged and the prosecution process starts over there, they'll say, hey, advocates, do you mind sending me this family's contact information? We have everything, so we'll have that communication and send that over. But sometimes cases don't get solved right away. And it takes some time, or those that are unsolved. So it can be communication on a monthly basis where we have the families calling in and saying, like, hey, do you have any update on my case? And we also like to be proactive during anniversaries, holidays, and try to touch base with those families to let them know that we haven't forgotten about them, that we're thinking about them. And I know it's true for the other advocates and myself. Like, we remember every family every death notification that we gave. Like, we remember those families. We remember those people were thinking about them. And we are overjoyed when a case is solved. Like, we're all over it. We wish none of this had happened in the first place.
But it's good to be part of bringing them closure, and I mean, when that can happen, that's a precious thing. Absolutely. There are some families that have even appreciated us, even like during the prosecution phase. It's not necessarily our role because there are other advocates, but when you build that rapport with certain families, there have been times where we go in and we sit in during the hearings, during the trials, during that sentencing, and it feels good to be able to support that family throughout the entire process, and hopefully at the end of it bring some kind of peace. I'm sure for a lot of people enduring trauma, everything is a bit of a fog. Is there a stage at which they realize, oh, you work for the police department? do they all realize that? Do they know that you do?
I think they do. Yeah,
Okay.
I think we initially let them know that we are part of the police department, and that we are definitely there for them.
But I think that's where they are maybe probably surprised a little bit that there's a portion of the police department that is advocating for them. And it's not an antagonistic relationship that maybe some people feel toward uniformed officers. And so I've certainly been on scenes where I'm watching them process that, this very helpful person is part of the police department, and they're like trying to make sense of that, in their head. Like,
I think what helps is that we are like responding, and we're definitely wearing like civilian clothing, but we have like a logo, polo that says police department. Yeah. So we're not in a hard uniform. So it's kind of like a warm feeling. It's different than the uniformed officers. So we kind of have that attitude, and when we arrive on scene, we let the families know, like, I'm your advocate. Like, I'll say my name is Wendy, and I am with the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department and Victim Services Unit, and I'm your advocate. I've had people that don't remember my name on scene, and they just say Miss Advocate. Or Miss Lady, Miss Advocate, Advocate Lady. So I think that's kind of important.
That rainy day, I heard one of the people there call you the nice lady.
Oh,
yeah, and you were nice to them. You were showing kindness, and that was important.
Yeah, I think so. Just because it's so hard for victims to get that type of notice, that your loved one, a lot of the times it's like a parent, like who wants to have that kind of day, that's horrible. So just showing that kindness and compassion and patience.
It's an important ministry. Yes.
It's definitely, it takes a very special person, and that's why I applaud the victim advocates in my unit. I'm the supervisor now, and I started as a victim advocate, but the other staff in the department may not have the patience, even though some of them are like really well versed in customer service skills, but maybe that de-escalation technique and calming. Like, one of the victim advocates had someone come in the other day, and he was extremely escalated, and he was crying, and he was loud, and he was just going through like all the motions of feelings. After being in the office with her for, it was like at least a couple hours. At the end of it, I was in my office, but I could hear him say, like, thank you. You are the only person that's ever helped me. So I'm sure other people wrote him off as like the crazy guy, or, the emotional guy, or this guy, he's got a lot of drama. But she took her time to kind of break everything down for him to be able to explain exactly what he was going through. And then she provided that support, and ended up like, helping with the report, with the things that he actually needed. And he felt heard. So I just, I see those interactions with the advocate, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it definitely is very valuable that you have someone that's like that within the department to help the vulnerable folks that come through.
Yeah. Is there a typical day in your office for you and your advocates? I mean, is it just always something different? Or
It definitely is always something different. There are days where we'll come into the office and we're doing data entry. We're on the computer because we are tracking all the services that we provided. We're registering all the people that we gave services to, making sure our database is up to date. So we're doing a lot of like office busy work, and it's just quiet.
Yeah.
And then as soon as someone says, "Oh, it's quiet today,"
that's when y'all get paged out.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm not a superstitious person, and when I came into the department, and I would go up to like the detective bureau, and I would say, "Well, I hope we can have a calm weekend."
Right.
Everyone would freak out, and they're like, why did you say that now? Because of you saying that now, like
them.
It's all gonna break loose, and but I'm not superstitious, so I just genuinely like hope it's gonna be a good day, and I don't feel like I've jinxed myself. I'm just like setting myself up for a calm day where there's peace in our city and there's no crime in our city. So we'll have those kind of days where, it's just calm and we're getting our busy work done in our offices. And then there's days where you just have walk-in after walk-in of people in high crisis. You'll have maybe like a mom in domestic violence with her kids. We just had a walk-in last week. The lobby was already full with the officer needing to take reports for different people that were kind of waiting in line. And a lady walked in with her abuser.
Oh,
she
really?
had an order of protection against him. And she was driving in the neighborhood, and he had been following her, and he hopped into her vehicle.
Oh, my.
And it turned out that he allowed her to drive him over to the police station. I think he was battling with some substance abuse and mental health issues like in that moment.
Okay.
So he kind of went along with her, and she drove the both of them into the police headquarters.
Oh, wow.
So while we had a full lobby of people waiting in line, this lady comes in, he comes in, they have to arrest him. He's not wearing shoes. We have to help the lady. She's got a couple kids with her. So it can be that kind of in the moment crisis, like you got to hurry up and you got to act and you got to assess, separate her, because obviously she's not safe. We don't know how he's going to react at any moment. Is he going to recognize like, oh, hey, and now I'm at the police station?
Right.
Or was that part of his tactics of control, abuse and control?
Yeah. Well, you just never know, right?
You never know.
Yeah.
So we had that lady, and then the advocate was already working with somebody else in like our main conference room. And then I had another lady that needed help with crime victims compensation, which I initially thought would be like a quick deal, and it turned out to be a lot more than that, because she started like disclosing more things that we needed to really tap into. So we can have those kind of days too, where we just have people waiting in line to see an advocate, and we try our best to not be rushed through any interaction with victims, and to be very thorough and make sure everyone is heard. So some days are a lot busier than others. And
then you have an extra layer on top of that, because you're in charge. You have to worry about how the unit is funded.
Yes.
Right? And so how is the Victim Services Unit funded?
Yes. So we have a ton of work to do when it comes to the grant management aspect. And by we, I mean I. We have one major grant that has funded our unit since we started it, and it's the VOCA, Victims of Crime Act.
Is that normal for victim services units? Are they typically funded by grants, not as part of the regular budget?
I think it would be both.
Okay.
The departments that have the funding for their victim services unit, they may fund it on their own, or they might fund one advocate in their department. But VOCA, that's what it's for. So they want to provide funding for these kind of programs. And VOCA doesn't only help law enforcement-based agencies, but they also help other agencies that serve victims of crime. Okay. So that's one of them. So it is a lot of making sure that we have all the reporting in place, the financial reports, statistical reports. Right. They want to know about what kind of services we're giving to the demographic of what kind of populations, who is vulnerable and underserved, that we are focusing our efforts on. So I'm keeping on top of that, making sure that we have all our numbers in check. It's been a challenge for me professionally, but I feel like this opportunity has helped me develop myself professionally in that aspect. It's
developing a new skill set.
Sure. It's not something that I, like, as a kid, ever dreamed of, like, doing as a grown-up. Like, I'm just gonna track all this data and report it, and I'm gonna stay on top of making sure that every dollar that we spend is accounted for. And I never dreamed of grant managing as a kid, but here we are. And I've had support from, several folks, a couple in particular within the department that have really helped my professional development. And at VOCA, there's an analyst there who I call and I bug all the time when there's something that I need help with. And also, like, someone within the department, she's a genius. And I just hit her up, and every time I have a question, she can usually help me. But little by little, like, this is my third year as a supervisor. So every year I need less help, and I kind of know a little bit better what I'm doing. So I feel like now I have an expertise over managing every aspect of the grant, whereas at first, when I was first learning it, it was extremely challenging to me, and I would be really stressed out, and I'm really anxious about making sure I got it right. And now a lot of the things are kind of like second nature, and I feel very confident in the things that we're doing, and I really enjoy pulling the statistical reports that are for the grant, because that shows us the amount of victims that we've served, the different demographics of the people that we've served, and that's extremely valuable. So I'll print those out, and I'll tell the advocates, I'll be like, hey, listen, look how many DV victims you served. Look how many orders of protection we gave. So all of those things that are very, like, desk work and tedious.
Administrative.
Because obviously we like working with people. We like working with victims and helping, being like that firsthand help. But it's extremely also valuable to see the data behind it.
Yeah. It's a way to measure the impact you've had. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really like that aspect of the grant managing. And I like supervising my staff. Yeah. So I think all of them are extremely qualified, and I'm glad we hired them, and just kind of seeing their professional development as well, and the things that they bring to the table and how they support and learn from each other. Like, that's very inspiring to me.
Okay. When you're hiring a victim services advocate, what kind of things are you looking for? Are there certain qualifications or certain personal attributes that are really important to this job?
I think for me, what I always talk about is dependability and competence. So someone that knows what they're doing and is dependable to do it. Just because of the way our unit works, we can't have someone that's kind of slacking. Right. Everyone needs to bring their A game to help these victims, and they can't lose their patience. So it has to be a compassionate person that has some training in trauma-informed care and some experience in working with vulnerable populations. So folks that have experience in different other helping fields, and their maybe education background has to do with helping people. I'm a social worker. We've had folks from sociology, human services, and then we have our criminal justice, that kind of thing, and just folks with experience helping people. So we have an awesome advocate that comes from a probation's background. So it's kind of interesting because she worked with the other side. She's working with the offenders, but that also gave her the knowledge to come in and apply that compassion, that trauma-informed care, but now working with victims. And, we have someone with a background in police dispatch. Right. And, she's just awesome at de-escalating people and thinking through things calmly, and that multitasking aspect, she doesn't freak out when 100 things are coming at her. So I just think it's just these different qualities that people have of being competent, fast, smart thinking, resourceful, but also warm and friendly and inviting and compassionate. It kind of takes everything, and you have to be good at working with people, because we're not only working with victims, but we're working with the officers out in the field, the officer at the report desk, the folks over at records unit, and the detectives. Our unit is actually part of the investigations bureau. Yeah. So we work hand in hand with the detectives on a regular basis, and we have to be able to communicate things about the victim, about the case, things that are being disclosed to us, to anyone that's leading an investigation. Right. So it's very important for us to also have those great communication skills, written and verbal, and resources that we're going to need, that the detectives may need or ask about. So yeah, just a few things, just a couple things that are important to be a victim advocate.
So why did you want to get into this? What led you to serving in this way? Because it's a noble thing. It's got to be very rewarding in a lot of ways, but it's also something that's going to cost you emotionally on a regular basis. Why would you get into this kind of work?
Yeah, it's kind of cliche to say, you just want to help people. And I do. I feel like ever since I was a kid, I was always that kid that was helping. My first language is Spanish. And when I was in elementary and middle school, and the school would have some kind of event and they needed a kid volunteer to translate, I would always be the first one that would raise my hand and say yeah, I'll volunteer and I'll translate for the parent-teacher meeting or something. I was the vice president in the student council in school, those kind of things, where you just want to be out there and support and help and make things better for people. But I also, in my personal background, have gone through different things in my life and with my family, where things have not been easy. So I just feel like being a person that can help open doors for people in their darkest moments, I really like that. So I've had other people that were like that in my life and for my family during very difficult times in my life. So I feel like it's a good way to give back, and I really appreciated that from them. So I can see the value of also doing it. So definitely it's the helping others, and it's also like you said, it can be hard. You have to really disconnect your work from your home. But that doesn't mean you don't care about these people. But one of like the mantra that I tell myself is this is not about you, because there are times where you're going to a case and it's extremely hard and horrible, and all you want to do is just like bawl your eyes out and cry with that family. And I tell myself, this is not about you. This is not about you. This is not about you. And I just say it over and over in my head, and I try to focus on just providing my service to that family. But that doesn't mean that when I get back in my car and I drive back home to my family, I'm not like teary-eyed, or I'm not crying or praying for them personally. Because it can be very hard.
Do you have a self-care kind of like, this is my go-to thing to help me cope with all the terrible stuff I just saw?
My family is very important to me. So my wife is a police officer within the department too. So it's not hard for me to be able to like vent and release, because she kind of understands a lot of the things that we see, and vice versa. And I'm also a very like spiritual person. I'm not per se religious, but I do believe in God. So I definitely pray a ton. And I love my fur babies. I have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and they definitely give me a lot of peace. I feel like the animals, they kind of tell when you're having a bad day.
Yes.
And if I just come home and I'm after a hard day, my cats will come and, they'll give me the extra attention. I have a cat. She's really ornery, but I feel like she can sense when I'm having a bad day, and she's actually nice and cuddly and friendly.
You have empathetic cats. Yeah. See, my cats don't care.
They kind of feel, because usually I'm like, Sandy, come here. Let me pet you. Let me hold you and squeeze you. Yeah. And she runs off and she's mean.
Well, that sounds like a cat.
If I come home and I just like sit on the couch for a bit to decompress, she'll come and she'll check on me, and she'll like end up on my lap, and she's being nice. So I feel like for me, my animals, walking with my dogs, I'm not a big workout person, and my wife is. She loves to work out, so she encourages me to go like on long walks with her, and I will. And I have to admit that does help, the walking. So I wish I could be more intentional and proactive about using that as my own self-care, and doing it without being prompted. But yeah, those kind of things, spending time with my friends as well. Like, we love to check out new wineries in town, new breweries in town, going out to restaurants, going out to eat. So I try to like make sure that I'm still having a balanced social life, and then getting rest at home, and then being competent at work. So try to keep it all balanced. My friends, they know my on-call calendar, and they're like, hey, are you on call this weekend? So everyone's kind of in the loop. And if I had a hard day, sometimes I do want to talk about it. Sometimes I don't want to talk about it. And my friends know not to go on and ask 100 questions about some really hard case.
Yeah.
They give me my space as well. So I think it's kind of important, like your support system for anyone that is working not only in a victim services field, but definitely in law enforcement and in any kind of stressful career, to have a strong support system. And maybe not everyone has access to that, but if you can find that one person, or that, adopt a cat or a dog for that.
That's awesome. Well, Wendy, you do a fantastic job, and I really appreciate you explaining victim services to us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Wendy for doing this interview. As you've heard, she's a busy lady and has a lot of responsibility resting on her shoulders, not just as a supervisor, but going out into the city to help people. In fact, when I think back to some of the worst weather I've ever endured on the scene of a homicide, sweltering heat, driving snow, pouring rain, in each one of those specific instances, Wendy was on call with me, helping victims and their families. Having an advocate to give special attention to these folks on behalf of the police department is one of the things we do really well in our city. So I'm thankful for Wendy and her team. Not everybody can do this job, but some of you listening could do it. If you're considering becoming an advocate for victims in your city, or maybe starting a brand new victim services unit in your department, I'd highly recommend reaching out to Wendy and asking her how to get started. I've seen advocates become police officers, and police officers become victims advocates. Perhaps victim services will be one of the chapters in your story. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
I probably would have laughed at somebody too, because that's the way cops do things, right? That's the way we do it. We take a bad situation and just make a joke out of it. But that incident affected me so profoundly that after we were done on the drive home, I just started bawling. I just started crying. I pulled over, and I was intending to commit suicide that night because, to me, I had been exposed, right?
Yeah.
I thought that I was doing a great job by hiding it, and that machoism, that warrior mentality, you always stand up tall with your shoulders back, and you look people down and you don't back off, and but that's all a mask, right? And that had been a mask for me for years.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.